Now we are going to learn about something called strict mode in JavaScript. Strict mode is basically a way to opt in for a restricted variant of JavaScript, which means that there are some things, some features in JavaScript, normal JavaScript, non-strict mode, which we don't want, and in order to get rid of those things, we can use strict mode. If you use strict mode, then there are some sort of base JavaScript parser, some code optimizations also, but that is low level thing that helps in JavaScript parser to run it fast. But from our perspective, from developers perspective, it makes our life somewhat easier, because it gives us some functionalities where some things which are like silently giving error, or some things which is not expected, they will be properly visible, and they will be properly given error if we are not using properly in strict mode. Okay, so we'll see some of the examples, but firstly let's see that how to use strict mode. One more thing, that strict mode, don't think that strict mode is just a subset of JavaScript, which means that yeah, some features are there, they are disabled or something. That is not the case. Actually it has a completely different semantics than non-strict mode, which means that the behavior itself will change. Okay, it's not that some features are some missing. The whole behavior of the code will change. Okay, that we'll see soon. Now, script mode can be applied at many places and in many ways. One of the most common ways is to use strict mode for the whole script, which means that let's say we have a script, this index.js, and for the whole script, so and some code is there. So let's say let x is equal to 5, let's say log x or something. This is our piece of code, right, which is running fine. And let's say we want to enable strict mode for this whole script. So in order to do that, we use this syntax. We use something called use strict in string at the top. So at the top, if we use something like use strict, then this is the syntax. So this thing is a string. You can see that this use strict is a string. Now you can use this in double quotes also, that is fine. You can use this in single quotes also, that is fine. But the idea is that the use strict is that thing is a string, and if you put that string at the top, then and again here also, if you don't put semicolon, then also it works, but generally like all statements, it's a good practice to put semicolon here also. Okay, now this thing is strict mode enabled. So now if you run, then also the same behavior, because we have not written some code which has a different behavior in strict mode and non-strict mode, which will come to soon. So yeah, if you simply write use strict, that script now runs in strict mode. So firstly, let's see some of the behavior. Earlier we saw that we could use let, const. We also saw that there is something called var, right? Now you see that var is also behaving like that, just scoping is different and it creates global variables. So you don't want that, that is fine. But let's say I don't use any keyword. Then if you don't use strict mode, then what happens, that you can see that this is still working fine, and this is like dangerous. We discussed that sometimes because of a simple typo, a completely new variable will be created, and whatever you wanted to update something, assign some variable to already existing variable, assign some value to an already existing variable, that will not happen, and that might create a bug in your code, right? This you don't want. So right now it is running fine. What we want is that if we enable strict mode and then run this code, then you see that this will give me error that x is not defined. So this sort of behavior, that creating a variable without any keyword, that is not allowed in strict mode. And if you do something like this, then this is fine. Okay, so this is like using strict mode for the whole script. Now there are other ways also. So let's say I have a function. Okay, I have a function. So let's say I have a function foo, and inside this thing is written, and let's say outside also this thing is written. Now this x scope will be definitely inside this block, function block, that is fine. But if now I do something like this, then whether I and let's say I call this, okay, so you can see that this 5 and this 5 both are printed. Now let's say I remove this thing, then you can see that in strict mode this thing, this this thing is what it is working is this x is basically taking the scope of this variable x, and that's why there is no error. So that is what is happening. But if you use a different variable, let's say y and y, then it is going to give you error. Why? Because this thing is in use script, use strict is written at the top, which means that it is enabling strict mode for the whole script, whole JavaScript file. What if you don't want that? What if you want only to enable for this function? Then you can write inside this function, and now you can see that this is giving error. And if you are not using something like this, then this is not giving error. And if you are using here something like x is equal to 5, you can see that this is not giving error. Why? Because you have not enabled strict mode for the whole script. You have only enabled it for this function, and that's why this thing is working. And if you don't want that, then definitely if you enable it for the whole script, then this will also give error, right? And this will also have to be fixed properly. So yeah, you understand the idea that if a variable is not already defined and then you are creating a new variable, then and then you are trying to create a new variable globally, like simple by assignment, that is not needed, that is not at all allowed in strict mode. But we saw that we could enable strict mode for functions also, something like this syntax: inside the function you use strict, and that's it. Now there are some other places also where strict mode is there, and there it is available implicitly, which means that strict mode is there and you don't need to write use strict to use strict mode. In fact, the strict mode is enabled by default. So for example, strict mode of in modules, there is something called modules, which we will cover in the later videos. But modules are a new addition from ES6 in JavaScript, and whatever the contents you write inside JavaScript modules, they are automatically in strict mode with no statement needed to initiate it, which means that you don't need to write something like this. Okay, so how to create a module? Actually the thing is that if you write anything, if you say, let's say you write something like this, right? And if you write something like export or import these, so you can import new files at the top, right? So if you write and import something from something, so that's syntax, right? If you either import or export, and export syntax is also at the bottom, where you can write something like export const z is equal to 10 or whatever, or you could use export default, which we will see the exact syntax later. But the idea is that there can be many ways in which the export and import can be written. The JavaScript detects that if it finds export or import somewhere in the file, then it knows that actually this file is a module. This file is a module. Now if you try to run this, actually by default you will get an error. it is saying that what is this export, because by default all files are not treated in Node.js as JavaScript modules. Okay, now there's a way to run this easily, and that is that if you rename this file using using instead of .js, if you use .mjs, then it knows that this JavaScript is a module JavaScript, right? And then if you run this piece of code, then you have to run this mjs, and now if you run this code, then you see that it is working fine. So that is fine. That is fine. In fact, there are ways to run this with .js syntax, .js extension also, rather than so if you change the extension to .mjs, then by default Node.js assumes that it can be a module, so that is not a big deal. But if you are using simply .js and then you want to then also you want to use module inside, then there are ways for that, which we will discuss later. Okay, right now just understand that in module, there's something called module which we'll discuss later, but the point right now is just if module things are there, then whenever we are using variables y is equal to something here, then this has to be created, otherwise you can see that it is giving me error. And you can see that it is giving me error like strict mode. In fact, it is a strict mode. In modules, even if you don't write use strict, by default it is strict mode, and that's why this behavior is working, right? So modules are a place where the entire contents of JavaScript modules are automatically in a strict mode, even if and no statement is needed to initiate it, right? You don't need to write use strict or anything inside modules. Okay, that is one place where automatically it is done. So this is something like this. There is some other place also, something called classes. Classes also we will discuss later in some videos, where in class what happens is that when a class is created, and we'll see what is a class. The point is that inside class any function, any method is there, and constructor is there, where all the places by default everything is in strict mode. So if there is some method which is essentially some function inside a class, or this is constructor is a special method of classes, you might be knowing if you're aware of classes. But everywhere automatically this code runs in a strict mode. We don't need to write use strict anywhere here. It is like modules, automatically it runs right there. Okay, now checking for strict mode, we know that there are ways that a script can run in strict mode or strict mode, right? Now how do we check that my current code is running in strict mode or non-strict mode? The idea is that you can directly use this. You might not understand the whole of this right now, that what is this variable called this. So we will discuss this in the next video, but right now just I will give you a one liner that in strict mode, if inside a function if you use this, then it is used as it is basically undefined. So in strict mode it is undefined, otherwise it is not undefined, then it is very much easier to use this, right? Now in strict mode what will happen, that this undefined will become true. Like if it is not this, which means that if it is strict mode it will be undefined, but this will return true. If it is not strict mode, then this will not be undefined, and then not of that will return false, right? And that's why is a strict will work in that cases. So for example, you can see that if I write the same thing here, for example, this is a module right now, right? So it has to be in strict mode. So let's test that hypothesis here. So we are trying to use that const is strict and is equal to, and we are creating a function, and we are also calling that function, right? And what is that function? That function is essentially just where you are returning not this. Okay, so what is this? We will discuss later, but right now just I am trying to show you that what is this variable is strict. And when you run this code, then you can see that true, it is printing true, which means that yeah, this piece of code is right now in strict mode. And when you change its extension Sorry, sorry. I just wanted to not delete this file. I just wanted to rename it to .js, right? Now, if I run this piece of code, then obviously it will give me error that what is this export. So I need to remove this export. I don't want it to be a module or something. Fine. Yeah. So when I run this code, it is saying that use 5 and false, which means that is strict is giving me false. This is not in a strict mode, right? But as soon as I write something like use strict, and when I run this piece of code, then I see that it is 5 true, which means that now this piece of code is running in strict mode. So this is a small trick to find that whether the code is running in strict mode or not. Okay, so fine, this should be it for now, and this variable we will discuss in detail in the next video, but for now it should be sufficient for detecting the strict mode. Now, what are the things which are done in strict mode? That when we are doing strict mode, then what are the things happening? So a couple of things happen. We get errors for inadvertently, if we are doing some inadvertent mistakes or something, like you didn't want to do something but you are by mistake you are doing something. Those silent error sort of things, silent things, it will not give you an error also. It's silent, it will silently it will run in non-strict mode, and you will not even know about that, those errors, like for example this also, right? This also. So this thing, if there was no strict mode, then it would have silently gone, right? But in strict mode it will throw me error, right? That there. So these sort of things are one use case of strict mode, and some more use cases are there, like eval and arguments, which we'll discuss later, are some of the functions which are slightly complicated, but strict mode does some strict regulations on them, and so that it becomes slightly easier to handle these functions. Okay, there are a few more, but generally they are slightly advanced and we will not cover in this course right now, but we might cover in some advanced JavaScript course. Okay, but for the most of the part, like 90-95% of the cases, whatever we will need, everything will be covered here right now. Okay, so let's get started. So one of the common things is converting mistakes into errors. Okay, so let's say strict mode is seeing some code which earlier accidentally you created some mistake, right? One of the simplest mistakes is what? One of the simplest mistakes is creating global variables accidentally, which was the first example we took, something like this, right? This sort of thing in strict mode is impossible to write. Okay, and this will throw error. So my value is equal to 10, some variable directly you are trying to create without any let or const or var or something, right? Then it will give you error in strict mode. So that is the most common use case. Apart from that, there are some other use cases. So for example, in function, if you write a function, right, and a, b, c, if all the three arguments are different, then it is fine. But if you use the same argument name for, let's say, first or second or third, or first or third, you see that in this case first and third parameters both are same using the same name. Actually this thing will work fine. Silently it will work fine in case of non-strict mode, but in strict mode it will give you error that duplicate parameter name is not allowed. And in non-strict mode, the default behavior is that automatically whatever is the last, so for example in this case a, b, a, right, and we are passing 1 2 3. Now b is 2, there is no doubt about it, but what is a? Is a 1 or is a 3 inside this? If I print console log a, actually a is 3. So whatever comes last, that value is taken for all the places a is used. So obviously a is used here and here, but the last value which is used is third argument. So the third parameter, which is a in this case, in this function, that will be taking the third argument. So that will be 3. So in this case a will be 3. Okay, so if you print this, then it is going to, so but this thing will in non-strict mode, it will be silently running properly and giving you this thing. But in strict mode it will properly give you some error that please don't do such things. Okay, Now, converting mistakes into errors, there are a few more of them. So, for example, strict mode forbids zero prefixed octal literal. Earlier, we saw that if you are having, let's say, a variable, let's say, let a is equal to let a is equal to 10 or 15, right? Then obviously this is decimal, there's no doubt about it, right? But you could use something like let's say c variable, which is 0x, right? Then we saw that this thing is hexadecimal, right? Okay, this thing is hexadecimal. So it is 15 and it is 20. Why it is 21? See, it is hexadecimal. 61 into 16 raised to the power 1 plus 5. So 16 plus 5 is 21. That's why this thing C is 21. This is hexadecimal. But there is also one thing called octal. And for octal, if you don't use strict, which means that in non-strict mode, if you simply put 0 in front, then that becomes octal. Now, this thing is this thing is pretty fine, but the problem in this case is that many beginners might mistake it for something else. So they might understand from normal arithmetic that 015 means 15, but that is not the case, right? If you do some padding, or let's say some server, some strings are coming in 015 format, and you are trying to just evaluate that from that string using eval or something. Those things will are bad, right? Now these sort of things, you can see that if you print b, you are not getting 15, rather you are printing 13. And why that is the case? Because this is now treated as octal. And in case of octal, it is 1 into 8 raised to the power 1 plus 5. 1 into 8 plus 5 is 8 plus 5, 13, and that's why this is 13. This is octal. So the second one is octal, this third one is hexadecimal, and the first one is normal decimal. This is not allowed because of the things which we saw earlier. This thing is not allowed, and octal literals are not allowed in strict mode. But there is one another way in which you can use. So you can see that something like this is one more thing. If you use one more thing, the beginners don't understand this thing, that it might be that 015 and 15 they understand the same thing. That is one of the things. One another thing is that it is slightly ambiguous, right? And it does not give you error in some cases. So let's say this b1 thing is 015 and this b2 thing is 018, let's say, right? And let's print b1 and let's print b2. Now you can see that this b1 is 13 and b2 is 18. b1 is 50 015, it is printed as 13, but there is no change in this. So what is happening actually is that in this JavaScript applies its logic that it is starting from 0, so might be octal, and that's why I will treat it as octal. But in this case, even if it is starting with 0, it might be octal, but it cannot be octal, because octal numbers can only have digits from 0 to 7, like decimals have digits from 0 to 9, and hexadecimals can have 0 to 15, A, B, C, D, E, F. So in that sense, you can understand that this octal can only have from digits 0 to 7, right? But here we are having something called 8, which means that it cannot be octal, and that's why it is treated still as 018 is treated as 18 rather than octal, because it cannot be octal. And that's why it is 18, but the first one is 13. Now this is like very much confusing, like this thing I have written is as 0, but still it should give me either give me error or something, right? It should not silently do something like this. So for that thing, the thing is that any sort of this 0 thing is not at all allowed in strict mode, and it will say you that decimals with leading zeros are not allowed. You can see that this thing is also not allowed, and even if you do 015, then also it is not allowed. They will say that octal literals are not allowed. So all these things are not allowed, okay, in strict mode. Now the only way you can use this is there is something called there is some syntax called 0o. Okay, so 0x we saw that this 0x is the syntax for hexadecimal, right? Similarly, the syntax 0o is for octal, and if you use this syntax, now everything is fine. So firstly, let's do this. So you see that b2 is not defined, so let's comment b2, that is fine, and now it will work fine. So this is octal, and even in strict mode, this octal literal 0o with 0o, it is working fine. Okay, now if I if I want to do 0 o on this, then it is giving me straightforward, it is giving me error, because now syntactically it is wrong, right? So in octal, 1 8 is cannot be. If 1 7 till now, till then it is fine, right? As soon as I do 1 8, then it cannot be an octal, because 0 7 characters are only allowed, right? That's why it is invalid. So it is fine, but anything like this is fine. And more importantly, if you are using directly this, then you don't need strict mode, which means that in non-strict mode also this code is valid, perfectly valid. But if you are using something like this, then it is not valid in strict mode. In this mode it is valid, but if you use strict, then it is not valid. Yeah, so you can see that 015 0015 and 015 both are working. So in this case, you can see that, let's say I run this thing, then this is working fine. And if I use if I use this thing, then obviously it will work. But if I use script, use so use strict, then what is happening is that now this thing will not work. That is fine. But the idea is that, let's say, even if you are using uh, even if you are using use strict, and let's say you are writing this, right, then you can see that it is giving error in webpack also. And we earlier saw that if we don't have strict mode here, then obviously this will run fine. But in this case, you are seeing that in this case this is also running fine. So basically it turns out that webpack is not creating like by default strict mode. So actually there are some nuances to it. So what webpack does, I believe, is that it for all the files which are modules, okay, automatically strict mode will be enabled. For others, it will pick and choose what features, what are the things, because webpack will do your whole sort of transpiling of your code, right? So the things which are like very much buggy, so they will not allow that. So it might not be a pure strict mode, but it might be a subset of that, right? Something like that. So in this case, you can see that if you use 015, then it works in webpack also. That is fine, and that is, they are lenient on that, right? But we should always want that the code which should run in strict mode also. So if we are properly using strict mode, then also whatever piece of code is running, then only that only we should be using in our normal normal things in the piece of code which we are writing for our functionalities, okay? So that is fine. Apart from that, one common mistake is that, let's say you are having some primitive type, and by mistake uh, you you just change something, right, in some of the in some attribute of that thing. So this thing will be silently ignored in non strict mode, but in strict mode it will be thrown error. So for example, let's say 15, right? Then now let's say 15 has a dot to string method, right? Not do dot to string, right? Now if you run this, then you see that yeah, this thing is giving me 15. That is fine. Now what if somebody tries to override this? Let's say a dot to string is equal to, and some separate function they are just writing. It turns out that this is ignored. You can see slightly it is ignored. So a.to string we are trying to set, but that is not working. When I'm calling a.to string, then actually original 15 is see, if this would have been called, then instead of 15 this would have been called, but that is not being called, right? On primitive type, if you are trying to set any attribute, that will not work. But that is not the main problem. Obviously it is not expected to do, it is not expected to work, and it is not working also. But the idea is that if we are using if we are doing something like this, then it is silently doing that. We don't want silently, we want proper errors. That's why if you use strict mode, then you see that cannot create property to string on number, right? So any type of property if you want to create or modify, then you cannot do this on a primitive type. Okay, so this is also not allowed in strict mode. Okay, now let's come to something called eval. Eval is actually you will never use eval, you should never use eval, but eval is basically a piece of code which is given in the text format, right? So text format which let's say you are writing let a is equal to 10 and a console log a. This is a simple piece of code which you are running, that is fine, 15, right? What if this piece of code somebody gave you, like somebody gave you in like some text format, so some text format somebody gave you this piece of code, right, from and you can understand that some string is there in that it is given some string, that string must be a template literal, otherwise that multi lines cannot be there, or let's say in some single line also, uh, single string, this will also work, right? But somebody gave you this piece of code to execute, but this is a piece of code to be executed as a string, but this is not a directly written code in some file or something, right? Actually, in JavaScript, you can and in most programming languages, they will provide you some functionality like eval, which using which you can execute that. So you can understand that if you write eval, and inside that if you write this thing, this string, then if you execute this code, then you will see that 15 is printed, right? So and it can have all types of logic. So let's say let b is equal to 10, and let console log a plus b. So the whole actually the actual code is running. So 15 will be declared, 10 will be declared, and a plus b, 15 plus 5, 20, 10, 25 is printed. You can see that the whole piece of code is running. It's just that it is given as a string rather than and this string can be a multi-line string also, but then in that case you have to use a template literal, right? And then you can use that thing. So something like this is fine, right? So like this you can do, but the idea is that there is there might be conflict in these variables, right? So for example, let's say you are using some here where a, right, and you are using let's say a your console logging a. You can see that and let's say I am right now not printing in from inside, okay? And since there is like no need of multiple line, just make it a single line string, and now this 15 is printed. The problem is that this sort of thing might be buggy, right? Because you might be using your own a outside, and again a new variable is created. This type of thing is not allowed. This the exchange of variables from inside eval to outside and outside to inside, these things are not allowed in the creation of those variables which are done inside eval is not allowed outside. So something like this should not be running fine, and in use strict, that is what they do. If you use something like this without use strict, then this is running fine, as we saw here also, right? But if you use strict mode, then then eval, whatever the variables the eval create, the only code being evaluated, the eval can't affect the variable in the outer scope. So whatever it is doing here, it cannot affect variables in the outer scope, which means that if I use strict here, then this a will be undefined, and that is what we want. We want to isolate these two scopes, right? We want to isolate these two scopes. So let's say we have let a is equal to 10, right? And you can see that now it is working fine. And if you are console log a, then you can say that inside this 15 is printed and outside this 10 is printed, right? This a is taken from here, and this is not conflict. Even if you use both as global, then you can see that they are not conflicting, right? These variables are not conflicting, right? That is what we want. If something like this is there, strict mode is not there, then you can see that they are conflicting, they both are becoming 15 15, right? And moreover, if this is not defined, then at all there will be like the declaration itself is happening inside. So the thing is that these things you don't want, and that's why you want to get proper errors in that case, and that's why when you use strict, then in such cases you will get proper errors if a is not defined in the outer scope, right? Which means that the mixing of scopes is not allowed. So something like this will give you a reference error. So that is fine. One more thing is that whatever we are doing right now what we are doing something like this, right? We are creating strict mode for the whole script, and if we are not using that, then it is silently giving us no error. What if we don't want that? We don't want the whole script to be strict mode, we just want this eval to be strict mode. Then you can use something like this, okay? Inside this, and if you use double quotes, then you can use single quotes, or if you use single quote, then you can use strict in double quotes, or you can escape appropriately if you want to use same quotes in everything. But the idea is that somehow you have to use a string, use strict inside this eval, and then only this part is becoming a strict mode, and that's why it will still give you error even if the whole code outer thing is still in non-strict mode. So you can say that x is equal to 20 and log x, this thing is working fine, which means that the outer code is still you can see that working in non-strict mode, right? But still the inner eval part is running in strict mode. So yeah, you can do something like this. Inside that you can declare use strict, and let's now see one final thing, which is called arguments. So arguments is a special sort of variable which is present inside a function, which is able to give us the arguments of that function. Which means that, let's say function foo is there and 2 3 is passed, right? Now if a and b are the arguments, then if a and b are the parameters, then the arguments 2 and 3 will be assigned to these parameters, right? Now a will be 2 and b will be 3 as usual, right? Now there is a variable this arguments, right? If you print this, then you will see that you are getting something like key value pairs. So the keys are basically the indices, the positions, and the values are their values. So 2 and 3, and then the positions are 0 1. So if you print arguments, then you will get this something like this. This is a special variable automatically present inside functions, okay? So if you write inside, let's say functions, then if you write inside functions, then you can see that I can print arguments, right? But let's say if you print outside it, then you see what you get. So you see that outside you are like getting, I believe that yeah, so by default some so I don't know, so the default behavior might be that in case of the whole file, you can read the documentation that in case of a file, it might treat it as a module and then try to give it as 0 1 to something. But the most common use case is this thing, like arguments inside functions is basically the arguments passed. Now the arguments which is nothing, so that's why this key value pair is nothing. But let's say here you are passing 1 2, right? Sorry, you are passing 1 2 here, let's say 1 2. Now if you pass a b, then you can see that you are printed this thing. Now this key value pair, this is what I was talking about. So this is like just an object. This is not an array, okay? even if you can access this using 0 and 1, this is not an array, and you can clearly see that array.isArray is returning false. This is not an array, this is an object, and simply array argument 0 argument 1, like this syntax works because this syntax is also working on key value pairs, and in this case, in this particular case of arguments, the keys are like 0 indexed sort of numbered strings. So that's why this syntax is working. Anyways, now we have a fair idea about what are arguments. Let's see that how the strict mode has some different behavior for arguments. What it does is that if you are changing anything in A, then that is generally by default reflected in arguments, and if you are changing something in arguments, that is by default reflected in A. That is not what we want. Okay, that is not what we want. We want arguments and the param and these things to be independent. Magically, these values, wherever, if you are changing here, it is reflected here, if you are changing here, reflected here. That thing we don't want, and that's why in a strict mode it makes this behavior disappear. Okay, so this sort of magical behavior is not there, and that's why the code is less prone to bugs. So for example, 2 3, so A is 2, B is 3, but now let's say I assigned A to 5. I assigned A to 5, so A is 5 and B is 3, that is fine, but you see that automatically arguments is also changed, which was earlier, if you would have printed arguments here, then you would have got 2 and 3, but now you are getting 5 and 3, which means that if you changed A, automatically arguments 0 is also changed. Similarly, if you change B, automatically arguments 1 will be changed. This is not what you want. Okay, so and the same thing will happens with arguments also. If you change arguments 0, let's say is equal to 5, then automatically A is also changed, and obviously arguments will be changed. This is not what we want, and that's why if we use strict mode, then if A is 2, B is 3 at the entry of this function, if you change A to 5, then just A is changed, arguments is not changed, arguments is still 2 and 3. Okay, and this might be helpful in like getting the original arguments of the function and make the code less buggy and something. So that is fine, and the same behavior exists when you modify arguments. So if you modify arguments 0 to 5, or let's say you modify arguments 1 to 10 or whatever, then what the only arguments variable is changed. Actual A and B, which is passed, is not changed. Okay, so actually A and B passed is still 2 and 3, as you can see. If I change arguments, then arguments got changed. That is fine. Okay, so yeah, these are the most of the cases which you will see in strict mode. That will be sufficient for our workings. In next video, we are going to see somewhat more about this variable, which we saw actually a while ago. Okay, so that will be all for this one. Thanks.